Ladies and gentlemen, today I'm thrilled to talk with James Deirmendjian. James is a Jiu-Jitsu world champion, but he's also very scientifically minded, and he's really made a pretty big impact in a pretty short amount of time on social media, calling out some of the myths and just the false information that's present around training in the Jiu-Jitsu community. So, James, can you give me a little potted bio of your Jiu-Jitsu career?
Absolutely. And I would call myself a world medalist, but you hear these guys saying champion, vice champion, so it's whatever. The reality of it is, I've been inches away from that first place spot, at least three world level events. And in terms of my career, I actually started in 2007, right, under the tutelage of Ed Keller in my hometown of Thousand Oaks, California. Now, Ed was maybe the third or fourth American black belt, at least per what he told us, And very unfortunately, Ed led a life that was, I think, isolated and, I think he was estranged from his family. And at the time, of course, black belts weren't getting paid anything. So it's not like he had a lot to go on. He was in his 50s. He ended up passing away of a heart attack on the mats. Which was really, a kind of an interesting eye-opening thing into the world of, I think, jiu-jitsu in general, the martial arts. And, a lot of people see this sort of glamour and there's a fantasy and an air of superiority, machismo around it, whatever. And the reality is, there are still world champions to this day who live in abject poverty, in favelas in Brazil and stuff like that, unfortunately, such
Well,
as
some of that is just shitty money management, the same way that those statistics about NFL football players being absolutely broke within a few years after they finish playing.
and that's entirely fair, but also there's no money in
And they're
jiu-jitsu.
making a ton of money to start with as opposed to jiu-jitsu, which pays almost
Yeah.
nothing.
Yeah, exactly. But anyways, from there, I went on and did a couple different trained at a couple different academies. And it was in 2010 or 11, I believe it was, that I had a falling out with a black belt instructor. Um, I ended up footlocking him during practice, and he seemed to be okay with that. But then when I came back around and sort of really trounced him on position the rest of the round, he was really upset, right? And from there, I decided, you know what, I'm done with this, right? I was 28, 29 years old or something like that, and I said, you know what, I'm not having fun anymore. So I took about 11, 12 years off, and then I started up again, Gracie Baja Simi Valley in 2021, 2022, late 2021. Just some really interesting life occurrences like led to that. A lot of pain, a lot of difficulty, a lot of challenges, that kind of brought me to this realization of, okay, like, how do I care for my inner child? How do I, fulfill my own dreams and do something really tremendous for myself that would make me feel like, whatever rejection, loss, failure I'm experiencing in life is not so bad. How do I sort of redeem this? And I thought to myself, I always wanted to try and be a jiu-jitsu world champion. So I started with training again. That took me that year, 2022, to Gracie Barra Northridge, where I trained up for the No-Gi Worlds, ended up taking second place in the Masters 2 division at the time, Blue Belt Masters 2. And then from there, as I told you earlier, I ended up deciding at that point that I was going to move to Austin and train with Danaher and the New Wave C team, as we kind of, affectionately put it, the shore break squad, as it were, at Renzo Gracie Austin, who John, he referred to us as the recreational players. That's when I discovered that it actually was permissible for a master's aged athlete to fight at the adult level. And since I had been held back from the promotion to the purple belt as a four-stripe blue for what was three belt ceremonies in a row at that point, while training with Gracie Baja, I said, hey, let me challenge myself, not be a sandbagger, fight adult, and also proof my strength and conditioning service, by doing so. I was 39 at the time. So I ended up taking third at the Gi Worlds that year while training with New Wave RGA. I was the only person in the room to medal at that tournament, amongst maybe less than a dozen kids, who went to that tournament, the adult gi worlds that year. And then the next year I would come back home, train again at Gracie Barra Simi Valley, and repeat that performance again, adult blue belt, third place at the Worlds. Similar trajectory with, two submission wins, one submission loss, both tournaments. So, and then beyond that, I've taken a lot of gold medals in the IBJJF Opens, mostly at the adult level. And brackets are not huge by any means. Like, I'll be the first to admit that, but that's also because the IBJJF has 7 masters divisions. So, I think for a time I was maybe like the 3rd ranked adult blue belt super heavy out of something like 300 in the world. But that's sort of faded now as I've been sort of battling illness and injury this past year. So
returning to training and then so quickly climbing the ranks is quite an achievement. So how did you either get good so fast or get good again so fast?
I think jiu-jitsu, like any other interesting human skill, it's a lot like riding a bicycle, right? I don't think you ever really forget, at least in my experience. For me personally, it was kind of like I jumped right back in, and I don't know if there was like any massive skill deficiency from when I left off. The other half of it, however, is even when I wasn't training jiu-jitsu for that decade, on the whole, I was lifting religiously at least 3 days a week, hard. And, I made kind of a personal religion out of just being as strong as possible, right?
What does hard mean?
Hard means like not messing around with light weights, too much, right? It means keeping the rep range, I would say, or if we could do it on the basis of like percentage of your 1 rep max, like keeping things for at least your core lifts between, say, 75 and 95%, right? Say 3 to 5, rep range, doing singles and stuff like that on occasion as well.
Okay. So kind of a powerlifting model.
Sure. And from there, I would start to incorporate more of this sort of functional stuff that's become really popular, because I do believe it has merit and value. But yeah, like just having that base of absolute strength. I think that's what's permit me to not just, get back to like world level competition or get to world level competition after a 10-year layoff. But to also, I think in the 70 matches or so that I've done so far, most of them at the adult level, I've managed to submit, I think, 32 of my opponents, so almost half, right? Mm-hmm. So, and, people might argue with me, oh, strength is not that important in jiu-jitsu. And I'm like,
it's all technique, my friend. All technique.
Like maybe if you want to just do positional wrestling and, take some backs and mount people and not finish them, okay, like, sure. But like, if the objective is to actually get the sub, like, strength is a huge advantage.
Okay. So that was a big part of coming back. Were there any other sort of techniques or strategies that you used to, like, how often were you training? How often were you lifting? What else were you doing? And, how did you structure your training?
Sure. I would typically train jiu-jitsu between 3 and 5 days a week before moving to Austin. When I moved to Austin, I trained 7 days a week. That didn't prove to be sustainable, given that, I'm not on PEDs or TRT, right? And it's not that I'm against those substances either. I'm truly not. I don't, like, as a rational, scientifically minded person, or one who likes to think of himself as such, like, I don't have a beef with any kind of drug per se, right? But the point is, like, in the federations that I fight in, they're typically banned, right? So I don't want to cheat, right? But yeah, so 3 to 5 jiu-jitsu training sessions a week, 3 to 4 strength training sessions a week. I have since begun to incorporate a lot of different kinds of cardio, from sprints to lots of steady state zone 2 low impact work. Um, but to get me to where I am right now, that was basically it. I think those things, lifting 3 to 4 days a week, train jujitsu 3 to 5 times a week, doing a lot in terms of recovery, monitoring my sleep, trying.
So
Go ahead.
that's one of the issues that people who are not on the gear, people who are not taking growth hormone or testosterone or the dog's breakfast of analogs, that's often where they run up against limitations compared to athletes who are using, because they just don't recover as fast.
Sure.
So how did you recover faster, or recover as fast as you could?
I swear, like, the magic secret, if there is one, and it's so preposterous, is just a 15 to 20 minute hot bath every night.
Mm-hmm.
You get all these people running their mouths about cold plunges and saunas, and like you could pay thousands of dollars for these things, and just the most low tech. I mean, think about it, Stephan. So, you're in with the science as well, but water conducts heat 30 times more than air does.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So if you get a bath of, I don't know, 110 degrees, 120, probably as high as we can usually stand it. Maybe higher, but like you get in there for 10 to 15 minutes, versus 180-degree sauna, that's air. The net heat units you're getting infused into your body, and your body core temperature elevation is just rapid and massive by comparison. Right. And so I found that, verified by my Garmin too, I typically sleep almost up to an hour more total when I take a hot bath at night.
Really?
My REM sleep and my deep sleep are typically a lot higher. Then I have like a little stretching routine, a 30-minute stretching routine I do right after the bath when it's accessible. And then, a little mindset work, meditation, breath work, reading, anything to sort of get your mind off of ruminating on the day's bullshit, I think works. Mm-hmm. So I think those are kind of the keys to recovery. But again, all that recovery is great, but it only really makes sense because I'm lifting really hard, and I'm actually training jiu-jitsu now at probably a more even-keeled technical pace, to be completely honest, most of my rounds.
So how would you, if you're lifting and doing jiu-jitsu on the same day, which would you do first?
It varies from person to person what they can tolerate, right? And I would say to go with your deficiency, right? If you're a power lifter, you're strong, do your jiu-jitsu first. You can maintain, you already know you can maintain your strength by training after, right? If you're a jiu-jitsu person who's scrawny as hell, right? You better get your lifting in first if you want to make strides there, But you see people do all kinds of different things. And for me personally right now, what seems to work the best is to not do jiu-jitsu and lifting on the same day, right? To separate the days. But different things work for different people, right? My 20-something-year-old athletes, try and talk them out of doing 7 jiu-jitsu sessions a week, right? It's not going to happen, Yeah.
Do you have a background in strength and conditioning then?
Yes, sir.
What background?
So I believe I started as a personal trainer when I was like 19 years old.
Okay.
And I'm 41 now. And so I've been doing this in some form or capacity probably for the entirety of my life. Gone some time without training clients explicitly, but my certifications, the ones that I'm most proud of that I think are the most interesting, the one that is the most interesting is from Complete Human Performance, Alex Viada, who is kind of a living legend in terms of coming up with the idea of hybrid training. And everything he does and says is rooted in a very deep, thorough understanding of bioscience. I think he got his kinesiology degree from Duke. And then I think he worked in like biopharmaceuticals for some time, right? And so if you want like a genuine scientific explanation as to how and why you can, train for endurance and reach your endurance goals while getting stronger, right? He's kind of the guy that always appealed to me.
What's his background? Or sorry, what's his name again?
It's Alex Viada, and the company is
Okay.
Complete Human Performance.
Okay.
So I've worked with him one on one, and really interesting guy. Very very. I mean, kind of similar, I think, to me, like literary, scientific minded sort of person, which is no surprise that I would gravitate towards his stuff.
So when you take a look at jiu-jitsu in general, it's really kingdom of bro science, right? I mean, you take a look, Joe Rogan starts talking about cold plunges, and all of a sudden every dude is buying a cattle trough and filling it with ice, or an old fridge and filling it with ice, and now he's cold plunging too, and swearing that it's put inches on his manhood and improved his skill by a full belt level. And then next month it's carnivore, and the month after that it's vegan, and there's this wild, absolutely unscientific careening from meme of the day, fitness meme of the day to the next fitness meme of the day. Well, we're going to go into some of these because they're just so fun to talk about. But why is jiu-jitsu so vulnerable to this, in your opinion?
This is such a great question, and I'd like your input on this as well. But I think at base, like at the bottom line, is that people who are generally attracted to it tend to carry a lot of like 1980s karate movie power fantasies with them, right? And I would not exempt myself from that,
Yeah, sure.
right? It's like we're all just kind of little kids who think that if we could be big and strong and beat people up, like that's cool, right? And so the problem is that there are certain people who don't kind of like perhaps see that for what it is, and don't have the intellectual capacity to get past that and to see, okay, this is kind of one part of my life. It may be a very important one. This is one mode in which I can engage with reality and make sense of it. But it was such a funny revelation and such a dumbfounding moment, I think, when I was training with the New Wave team, and John Danaher was just, he would stay after. It was very cute. It was very admirable and sweet of him. He'd stay after to sort of talk to us and to give us some extra stuff, which I really loved. It's kind of like the asshole uncle who's making up for his indiscretions with beautiful poetry, right? Is how I describe John, which I think he would admit, he's a flawed character, but he can act in a very redemptive, compassionate way. But he was just like, listen, guys, I want you to take this into yourselves and to never forget it. All of your beautiful jiu-jitsu is made useless by a 4-inch blade, right? Could be a crackhead wielding it. Doesn't matter, And I think that like people in the community don't understand that jiu-jitsu as a tool or an art is a very limited context of efficacy, right? And, like the phenomenon wherein black belts kind of overreach their professional scope and start giving medical advice or fitness advice or whatever it is, right? There's this kind of imaginative, superstitious aura that attends to the art itself, and that is very much alive within it, to where people kind of forget that there are sort of limitations to what jiu-jitsu can do, to what it can mean, to what it can teach us.
Yeah.
But I want to know your opinion on that as well, if you'll share.
It's such a complicated issue. I think part of it is that there's not a lot of data, right? It's a relatively data-free sport. If we were practicing the 100-meter sprint at the Olympic level, that's very easy to quantify. Look, this sprinter does his first 10 meters at this speed, and then his speed peaks at, I don't know, the halfway mark, and then he doesn't drop off, but this sprinter does drop off, and here's how the technique changes, and here's what the training was. it's a relatively quantifiable thing, but jiu-jitsu is so incredibly variable, and the body types and attributes are so incredibly variable, and the ways you can win are so incredibly variable. There's only one way to win in a 100-meter sprint, and that's to go really bloody fast. But you can win in a jiu-jitsu competition with a single judo throw. You can win in a jiu-jitsu competition by just grinding and grinding and grinding, but not moving very fast. And you can win in a jiu-jitsu competition by being able to put both of your legs behind your own head. And so, a full lotus behind your own head. So how then do you determine the right way to train? At the same time, it's so visceral. When you lose to someone, you really do lose to that person. It's not that, yeah, I ran my personal best, but somebody else had a better time. That guy beat you. So you want to leave no stone unturned. And thus, people who have certainty, dude, you got a cold plunge every day, and then you just got to eat coconut oil, 4 cups of coconut oil a day. That's very reassuring to people. Like, Joe Rogan told me to eat coconut oil and cold plunge, and Joe Rogan's cool. So certainty is incredibly seductive. Whereas if you go to a real scientist, what's the right way to eat for jiu-jitsu? Well, it depends. And that's the truth. But, well, it depends is not a sexy answer. Cold plunge followed by 4 cups of coconut oil is a simple answer. And and we're so prone to hero worship in this sport as well. And hierarchy. I mean, the whole sport is based on hierarchy, belt levels.
Yeah.
And within a belt, who medaled where, and how many students does this one instructor have, and how many people listen to this podcast versus that other podcast, that when somebody who's high status or high hierarchy speaks definitively, that's super seductive. And there's just an endless stream of bullshit because that's what moves podcasts.
Yeah.
Andrew Huberman reveals the one thing you must do to increase your dick size. That podcast would crush. But now let's talk to an actual dickologist. And,
it's a urologist.
Yeah.
But go on.
I'm speaking jiu-jitsu. And, he's going to break the sad truth to you that, the effects of the Swedish-made penis pump are going to wear off after just a little while, and they could actually damage you. So that I think that's my best stab.
Yeah. No, it makes sense. And the commercialization of everything and the need and the drive to commercialize certainly isn't helpful, right? It's in terms of people just getting access to the unadulterated truth, right? And this goes back to ancient philosophy, where it's like truth itself within the human mind is affected by our desires, right? When you want something or wish that something is the case, it can often very much seem to be, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's motivated reasoning, ultimately. And, I mean, part of the problem as well is that this is more an issue in the health and wellness space, but the health and wellness space is just one jump over from the jiu-jitsu space. I mean, how many guys how many jiu-jitsu guys listen to Huberman, who makes a ton of money flogging AG1, right? And
$40 million contract, I think it is.
Yeah. And Rogan used to make a ton of money with his fucking alpha brain.
Yeah.
Right? Which was studied. I'm going to get the details wrong, but it was proven by, I think, like the cousin of Aubrey Marcus, his co-founder. That was a pretty sketchy scientific study if you start looking at the validity of scientific studies.
Sure.
So the supplement industry is the king of both, inventing problems that don't really exist and then solving them, and also finding a supposedly negative effect in, here's why oatmeal is trying to kill you. Phytic acid. Eat my special oatmeal that has phytic acid removed. It's always, my friends over at the Conspirituality podcast, and especially Derek Barris, always says, listen to what they're saying and then look at what they're selling. Listen to what they're saying, look at what they're selling. And there are a lot of, jiu-jitsu people trying to drive you to their special promo code for a supplement.
Sure.
So what supplements do you take? He asks.
Right now, to be completely honest, not that much of anything. I think the single most impactful supplement I take is caffeine, to be honest. Like just regular old caffeine. But I take paraxanthine because it's a metabolite of caffeine, but it's milder, right? In terms of its side effects is how it's pitched, which I believe it seems to not get me quite as manic. But beyond that, I take stuff that's cheap, right? That I believe works, like I take this Cissus quadrangularis, which helps with like mood, and it helps with your joints, and it helps with body composition, helps reduce cortisol, and it works. But it's like it's $15 for a month's supply, like it's nothing crazy. I do have some pre-workout and some creatine that's just sitting in my closet, but I haven't used it in the month since I bought it because, like, do I really need it?
Well, of all the supplements, I would argue that creatine, caffeine, and protein are probably the best studied and have by far the greatest amount of evidence supporting their work. Are you trying to stay under a weight division? Is that why you're not taking creatine?
No. I'm not using it just because like it can give me some GI effects, some GI distress, and I'd rather not deal with that right now, and maybe I'll come back to it in a little bit, and just try it out. But I think between all the other foods I'm eating or whatever else is happening, it's like the last thing I need is diarrhea from creatine, right?
Well, here's where you get to one of the standard techniques in the health and wellness industry. Oh, so creatine is hard on your gut? Well, you're just not taking the right creatine. It's a no true Scotsman, right? No true Scotsman eats his oatmeal with a fork. Well, here's a Scotsman who eats his oatmeal with a fork. He's not a real Scotsman. So have you tried the new, creatine gluconate, which is 25 times more expensive? And so that you end up with that. That's a pretty common, I'm sure somebody's yelling at you, well, you just got to try this other brand of creatine because there's impurities in the creatine that you're taking, which could be, but is unlikely.
Yeah, to be honest, it's one of those things where if I felt like I was getting such a substantial benefit from it, I'd be using it, right? But the fact that I'm not using it kind of speaks for itself in terms of what it's actually doing for me. And there's also the fact of the matter that, it seems to be true that caffeine and creatine negate each other, right? And
I didn't know that.
Yeah, they're like biomechanical or biochemical explanations of this because, the effects that caffeine has via, I think it's cyclic AMP on the muscle fibers themselves is very much opposed, from what it would seem to the way creatine actually affects the muscle contractions, right? So, moral of the story, if you're one of these jiu-jitsu bros who slams 2 white monsters a day, you probably don't need to be taking creatine. You're just probably flushing money down the toilet. So there's my one gem I'll drop as far as supplementation.
I've not heard this, and maybe that helps explain creatine non-responders. There are some people who eat so much red meat that their creatine reserves are probably full, and I think that accounts for some people who don't respond to creatine.
Sure.
But I hadn't considered the caffeine angle.
Yeah.
So, in terms of nutrition, what are some of the biggest myths that you see floating around the jiu-jitsu space?
Man, there's so much stupid shit out there. It's so infuriating. Carnivore, I think, is like the worst one. I think it's positively the worst one. And the reason
Why
is,
would you say a carnivore diet is bad for you? It cured 12 people that I know of autoimmune diseases.
well, and so let me add some nuance to this. There are many, many, many good reasons why a ketogenic diet, not necessarily a carnivore diet, but a ketogenic diet is medically valid. Like for people with like epilepsy,
Yeah,
ketogenic can be awesome. For people with certain psychiatric disorders,
yeah.
ketogenic it really can even them out. People with schizophrenia have even done extremely well on ketogenic diets. But
It should be added that the ketogenic diet that they're on is off the charts. Like it's something like 80% of your calories come from coconut oil. If you're trying to deal with epilepsy, and for God's sake, do this with a doctor,
yeah,
it's an almost unsustainable diet.
sure, and perhaps it works for to calm the disease process
Mm,
for a period of time, and then you can start to reintroduce,
yeah.
carbohydrate or whatever, right? But there are medical uses for the ketogenic diet, but we really see it being effective in the case of these disease processes, literally. But the ketogenic diet also is not, a carnivore diet, right?
Mhm.
Because in the ketogenic diet you can still eat plant food, and the amount of micronutrients that we get, the variety of micronutrients that are found in plants is incredible, and they're different from the micronutrients that we get from meats typically. The vitamins, the minerals, all the kind of stuff, the polyphenols, the flavonols, all this kind of stuff that you don't find in meat at all, but you only find in plants. These antioxidant compounds, they're so good for you, right? And they're proven to be good for you. And they're proven to be good for just all kinds of health, from neurological health to, gut health to, like inulin, which is a prebiotic, which feeds the bacteria in your gut and helps to, create a good gut microbiome, which is another obsession that like people probably go on too much about, to be honest, because they don't know what the fuck they're talking about in the jiu-jitsu space. But just cutting out all plants from your diet, like human beings have been eating plants for fucking 300,000 years, dude.
They found sites from the Paleolithic where humans were clearly grinding up seeds to make some kind of bread, like it, or at least a
Meal,
porridge. So,
sure.
and it's also been pointed out by anthropologists that sure, you can find some tribes that ate mostly meat. And the classic example there would be the Inuit in
Yeah,
northern Canada. They're probably meat, I'm going to guess, 80 to 90% of their calories.
sure.
But then there also, if that's your carnivore, your historical, your caveman diet, oh, so you're going to eat seal meat and whitefish. But then if you go the same length of time back in history, you can find another tribe that ate nothing but taro roots and berries. So which Paleolithic diet are you taking? Which group? Where? And how do we know anything about their relative health? We maybe we can draw a few inferences from dental records, but I don't
But
think that hasn't been done very carefully.
and what was life expectancy? 30 years, maybe?
Yeah.
On the whole, we're talking, even 50,000 years back, 40 years maybe? No. Like these things, like this extreme idealization of this ancestral past that like is mythical. It's not even
Mm-hmm.
real.
How do you mean?
Well, it's ideological, right? It's it's it comes from a lot of these like alt-right types who believe that there was one true way of being human prior, right? That, since we've strayed from religion, from Christianity, from a Judeo-Christian worldview, as they put it, or even an Abrahamic worldview, if we're going to lump Islam into the whole thing, right? As we've strayed from a traditional way of doing things, right? Patriarchal, male dominated, single income families, whatever. All of these lumps of different things that kind of go together under the guise of, well, it was better in yesteryear, right?
And we should make our country great like that again.
Exactly. It's perniciously ideological. It's it's no different from this kind of ploy that's been used throughout history time and again, you know, to bewitch and bedazzle people, who are feeling something that's real, who are feeling some real discontent, But what's happening is we're kind of misnaming it, you know? We're projecting it onto some set of circumstances that's not like actually going to help us to resolve whatever the problem is.
I was going to throw in a crack here about, but surely we can agree that seed oils are bad for you.
This is like that's the worst one. This one just drives me so nuts. It drives me so nuts because there's so many different of these meta-analyses that are out there that show that like the polyunsaturated fats, polyunsaturated fatty acids in the seed oils themselves, right, are less inflammatory. They cause less markers of inflammation than saturated fat, which we've known. Like consuming too much saturated fat is not good. Do you see this stunt where RFK was like getting interviewed by like a news reporter, and he's talking about how Five Guys is now using tallow for their French fries, and how it just tastes so good and it's so much better for you. And like at the end of the day, we're talking about fucking fried food here, bro. There's acrylamides, there's oxidation of the lipids. Like there's a layer of toxic shit that tastes really good over the potato, whether you fry it in seed oils or
Yeah.
whether you fry it in tallow.
I will agree that food fried in lard generally tastes better than food fried in oil. You know, there's nothing like, I don't know, deep fried bannock that's fried in lard. I've had that up north. That's amazing. But it doesn't mean it's good for you. And, you know, I'm just very in tune with my body, James. I can just tell when something's good for me. And I can tell that these Shake Shack fries are good for me because they're fried in tallow.
Well, and so pork fat too, lard is actually also very high in polyunsaturated, or I think at least monolaurin, or you know, unsaturated fats. Let's just say, you know, that pork fat is. But again, like between frying it in tallow, frying it in lard, frying it in seed oils, it's fucking fried. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
like this is not a health food. Okay, like it doesn't matter what you fry it in per se. You know, I mean, obviously, like you know, motor oil or mineral oil is going to be toxic. So,
Yeah.
but between edible oils, the difference is so negligible in a fried food. And what people aren't grasping is that it's not just the quality of the foods, it's what's really killing us, what's led to this obesity epidemic in the United States in particular, is just the accessibility and of convenience of ultra processed foods, of calorically dense and you know nutritionally thin foods. It's so accessible and it's so cheap and it's right there in front of your face everywhere you go, right? And it's all set up so that we do buy it, so that we do buy it on impulse, so we can satisfy whatever you know emptiness is occupying us at a given moment, you know? And that's what's making people unhealthy, is just eating too much food. Yeah, it's shit food, but like there are plenty of people who eat a reasonable amount, maybe up to 20% of their diet's junk food, and they can still be healthy because they watch their calories, because they don't eat too much.
One argument that I see working, especially on men, about why they should be carnivore or why they should avoid seed oils and eat basically cholesterol rich fats like tallow or whatnot, is that it contains more precursors. You know, cholesterol is a precursor to testosterone. And this
Sure.
way, somehow you will magically make more testosterone if you eat tons of butter. Eating butter equals more testosterone, equals bigger muscles, equals more chicks. And I think that's a very seductive argument. A 21-year-old doesn't care about atherosclerosis when they're 50. They just want bigger muscles and more chicks.
And it's strange because there are even colleagues I have in the fitness world who are they're on the seed oil train. They're convinced that seed oils cause inflammation in the body more so than saturated fats. And they're convinced that like big food and big agra and big government are all conspiring against us to make us fat. And they're calling it machine lubricant, and they're pointing out like how hexane is used as a solvent in you know in detoxifying canola or rapeseed oil, right? Which you know in its natural pure form can cause you know heart problems from some compound that's endemic to the rapeseed that I forget the name of it at this point. But it's like this doesn't have to do with scientific reality, right? It's such a non-issue. what it boils down to, I think, is this incredible mistrust of authority, of governance, this incredible mistrust of the status quo that has people grasping and reaching towards these sort of alternative narratives, these sort of alt realities that, like, again, it's this displaced discontent that, may be fueled by some very real circumstances, some very real developments that aren't really being named or seen for what they are, right? In the course of human history, like, people have this kind of existential dread in this time that may be unprecedented in terms of its specific meaning. But then we're taking all these stupid things and we're projecting it onto them instead of trying to figure out what it really means.
Yeah. The point's also been made again by the Conspirituality guys. So Conspirituality is a podcast. I don't know if you've ever listened to it, but they're taking a look at the intersection between conspiracy thinking and the wellness, the yoga and wellness space. That a lot of the drive towards, supplements and crank health things are driven from not really having an affordable healthcare system. Because if it's going to potentially bankrupt you to go to the doctor to deal with your epilepsy, then spending $50 a month on some housewife's special herbal blend from her herbs that are harvested at midnight, who swears she cured her own daughter's epilepsy and her grandmother's epilepsy, $50 a month doesn't seem that much to try. Yeah, of course, there are reasons that big pharma there are things that big pharma has done to make us,
mistrustful,
question it. But, keep in mind that for each dollar that big pharma makes on a vaccine, big health and wellness makes $10 or $20 on supplements, right? It's actually much. The exception there was during the peak of COVID when they made a bit more money, but still, during the peak of COVID, call it 2022, I just looked this up, supplement sales were still 5 times more than the amount of money that Pfizer was making from making mRNA vaccines. So yeah, it was a nice monetary boost for them, but all the same incentives and far less safeguards apply to claims made in the supplement industry and the health and wellness industry. And of course, it all culminates in RFK Jr. essentially destroying medical science. I made a bunch of predictions at the beginning of COVID, and one of them was that something good could come out of this if these mRNA vaccines take off because of the ability to personalize and really target cancer treatment. Oh, you've got type 45A-2 of lymphoma. Don't worry, we can make you, and we've got the exact vaccine for that. And certainly there was just recently a trial where it took pancreatic cancer from something like a 5% survival rate to a 50% survival rate using mRNA vaccines. And guess what's being shut down this week? What research is being shut down this week? mRNA cancer vaccine research. So
Jesus Christ.
And it comes from this massive fear and distrust, which has been partially earned, but massively amplified by the conspiratorial crowd, by the Joe Rogan crowd, by the health and wellness crowd, by the supplement industry crowd. Listen to what they say, but then watch what they sell.
100%, man. And the other wrench that we need to be sure we're throwing into the spokes here is the fact of the internet. Because what happens is all these people get together on these platforms and they share these like insane ideas. And it's like a doubly terrible game of telephone where they egg each other on and they talk to each other about, they share all these paranoid conspiracies. And then what ends up happening too is you get impressionable hippie types from the, which is so ironic, from the wellness space. They link up with the hardcore, fascist types on the alt-right. And there's like this unholy commingling of impressionable moronic ideas. And it festers on the internet.
Can you give me an example of a moronic idea that festers when the horseshoe of yoga wellness culture runs into the MMA, and I'll say at this point, mostly fascist MMA culture.
Yeah, I mean, look at this whole like trad wife, crunchy mom bullshit you see all over, social media with these women who are coming out and they're like, my destiny was to make babies and to wear a dress and to stay at home while my husband works and earns because traditionally that's what he's supposed to do. And by the way, here's my witch wisdom about how, you know, like about how seed oils are going to kill you and you need to, not eat glyphosate. You need to be careful about glyphosate and the Costco fucking chicken in the plastic is going to kill you because it's got carrageenan in it, you know?
Get on my pyramid scheme downline.
Exactly.
Because it's the
Right?
only way that we can make money. Because Bobby's not actually working twice as hard now that I'm raising all the kids and doing all the cooking and doing all the housework. Somehow that didn't work out. He's not making twice of what he used to before I submitted myself to the yoke of his authority. Oh man, I'm going to piss so many people off, but I don't care. Let's go for it.
What can you do, man? When you see these influencers who come out there and they say things like, it's bad to be single, everyone should have kids. Like, you just start looking around, you're like, oh, what do we got? Like 9 billion people on the planet now? Like, where's the fucking space, dude? What happened to quality over quantity? How
Yeah.
could you just come right out there and say that, like, we need more humans, right?
Well, I grant you that we need more humans in this specific setting. It's if we go from our age pyramid, which is a few old people at the top and lots of young people at the bottom,
Sure.
and we turn that age pyramid into an age skyscraper and then an age inverted pyramid, that's going to be a difficult transition. But let's go make that difficult transition, because if we just keep on to maintain that pyramid, and now we go to 20 billion people, and now we go to 50 trillion people. I mean, I think Warhammer established this. If you put 1 trillion people on Terra, it doesn't lead to a very nice Terra.
And it's so funny. 'Cause I'm a Warhammer nerd myself, but to relate that back to even a scientific example of which people seem to be grossly ignorant, it's the National Institute of Mental Health, rat cities in, like, I think it was like the 60s and 70s, right? Where they were like, hey, what would happen if we gave rats an unlimited supply of food and water in a confined space? And that's kind of where we're at this point, at this stage of civilization. Everything is easy. Like, there aren't many things out there that are killing people off in the developed world. Diseases are mostly curable, right? Like,
Mm-hmm.
there isn't anything out there that's culling the population so much.
We're working on that.
Yeah, yeah, we're regressing to the dark ages so we can fix that.
Airborne Ebola will save us all. But go on.
But the like, and what would happen in these rat cities is this infernal mayhem that's just, completely mathematically predictable. Female rats from overpopulation, they'd give birth and they'd eat their babies right away. Rape and murder were the law. And the catastrophe that would obtain after these overpopulation events in the rat cities was like, it was an unthinkably scarred society that was created, a rat society where, like, all the male rats were like out on the outer edge, the periphery of the cages, or the rooms, and the females would like be inside, and there was no commingling, and they were like psychologically sterile by the trauma they'd been through, and it's like, okay guys, you want to just keep breeding blindly, like, this is what happens, if we don't start to pay attention to quality of life, if we don't start to pay attention to the things that make the world beautiful, if we don't bring funding back for the arts in the United States, which have been defunded for so long, because we're so much about the bottom line.
Well, to drag this back to jiu-jitsu, because I'm very easy to get off track on this topic, obviously. But to drag this back to jiu-jitsu, we've talked a little bit about the nutritional and the supplemental mistakes that people can get sucked into in the sport. What about training methodologies? What are some of the inefficient training methodologies that you see, especially for people who are trying to compete and be fairly serious about their competition?
doing things like prioritizing road work, like making just running your training program. Some people still do that, and it's a lot of impact on your joints. And it's not to say that running can't have a place, but it has to be very minimalistic, right? I use sprints, for instance, 3 times every 2 weeks, 3 sessions every 2 weeks, say. But like, there's some people who just put in road work because, you know, podcast influencer says it's necessary, right? But other mistakes I would say that are pretty conspicuous. There's a black belt out there who, very nice guy, and I have a lot of affection for, but I talked to him about coaching with me because, he realized he was at a point where he needed to get stronger, and like 12 out of 10. When it came down to it, his excuse was, I can't really do things like heavy squats and deadlifts and presses anymore. My body can't handle it. It's because I have all these imbalances, my muscle imbalances and asymmetries. And it's like, there have been studies, like, there's no such thing as a perfectly bilaterally asymmetric organism, first of all, right? Doesn't exist unless we're talking about like cellular organisms, and even then, everything's asymmetric. Second of all, imbalances are the reason you should do heavy and hard resistance training, so that you can get those asymmetric, parts of your musculoskeletal system like working in concert against heavy load, like from a neurological perspective, say, or a skill perspective, or people doing only yoga and stretching and foregoing all strength training. And there's a whole yoga crowd out there. I think the Yoga for BJJ guy, I like him, but he feeds this crap where it's just like lifting weights is bad, only do yoga. When actually, like, when you consider it, flexibility and mobility training are in many ways a form of strength training. You're training yourself to be strong in certain ranges that you normally don't even, go to. And then perhaps on the other side, if anybody thinks that just lifting weights and not doing any kind of specialized mobility flexibility work, like, that's a great way to become extremely tight and get injured and develop, joint problems, that kind of thing too. I think there's just a couple different things that I think are errors. The big emphasis on like the flashy functional stuff. You see these kooks out there like David Weck, Nadia Aguilar, that has infiltrated a lot of the jiu-jitsu, training.
So give me an example of so-called functional training that you've seen in the jiu-jitsu space.
I mean, like when you see
sledgehammer hits followed by monkey bars with a gi followed by
all this kind of shit, man. All this kind of shit where it's like, you're taking a tether ball effectively and swinging it around your head.
What's wrong with that? Is it just that it doesn't work, or that it's actually bad for you?
It's not that there's anything wrong with it per se. It's a question of like, what are you accomplishing? Do you know?
Multiplanar core stabilization, MPCS for short.
It looks cool. I mean, you got these crackpots like David Weck, who, I don't know if it's like the spinal engine theory, where he's talking about how we need to move and how all of exercise physiology is wrong for advocating for a fixed, stable trunk and core. And it's like, we can do all of these things at the same time. Yes, flexing and bending your spine is great. And I think that's been kind of a cool thing to see, where a lot of people on the progressive side, that's good, in the jiu-jitsu world and just in the strength training world. Like, we realize that there's no such thing as perfect posture. There's kind of also kind of moral ideological underpinnings to these ideas of like being upright, and so like, you can round your back, and you can round your back while you're lifting, and butt wink isn't really a thing to be worried about for a lot of people. Having slouch shoulders, grappler shoulders is like, it's not necessarily unhealthy. It's not, there's nothing you're necessarily limited by in many, if not most cases. But
I think it probably becomes more important if you're trying to squat 500 pounds.
Sure.
Getting closer to ideal spinal form is important if you're trying to absolutely push your deadlift or your squat.
It can be, but then the exception.
But then there are some people who do everything wrong and still pull massive amounts of weight.
That's it. What was his name? Alexeyev, some old Russian powerlifter who sadly died in like a bar fight, right? but he pulled like 990 and he always had a curved back, you know. You see a lot of professional strongmen who were at the top tier who they have some spinal flexion at the bottom of their squat. It's not the end of the world, you know, like, and they're squatting 600 pounds for reps and stuff like that, you know.
Yeah. Just to jump back to the flexibility versus strength thing, I think two things are probably true. Number one, we've known for a while that your injury rate increases if you're extremely inflexible or extremely flexible. You can be too flexible for your own good if you're measuring just by your chance of getting injured, and if you're an absolute stiff board, then you're also likely to get injured. So that's true. At the same time, most high-level jiu-jitsu people are pretty damn flexible. If they're competing, they're much more flexible than the average individual. So I think they're probably dealing more with the I'm too flexible for my joints to be completely safe. They're more at that end of the spectrum than they are at the other end of the spectrum. Would you do you think I have that right, or am I missing something?
Potentially, and I would say more so at like the lighter weights. Once we start to get up into the heavyweights, you do see some freaks who are like super, super flexible, but it's less of an occurrence from what I've observed. But I think a lot of this is kind of resolved, this conundrum, by just balancing things out. Because a certain degree of strength in sort of classical sagittal plane movements, whether it's just a normal deep enough squat or deadlift or press overhead, bench press, right? Those movements will, you know, limit your flexibility in a way to where a lot of these more flexible guys, like, that's what they need. It's just like classical sagittal plane strength training to keep those joints from being hypermobile. It would help, in my opinion. But on the other end, yeah, these big hulking guys are guys who are super well muscled, right? I know for me, you know, I've always been pretty stiff, you know, as a lifter, and incorporating at least a half hour of static stretches a day, it's just been a game changer, not just in terms of my performance, but also like recovery.
So what's your approach to stretching? Is it a dynamic stretching, or do you go to a position and hold it? You know, that's also another way to, you know, you ask 3 fitness experts about stretching, you'll have 5 opinions.
Sure. Yeah. And there's a lot of different techniques that you can use, and a lot of them are legitimate. You know, there's a lot of different ways to skin a cat, as it were. And so I think, you know, for me, one thing that I really like to do for myself and my clients is I do use some of the principles from, you know, what's known as functional end range strength training. So the point is to load the muscles in the position of extreme stretch as much as you can.
But can you give me an example for, I don't know, bicep curls?
Sure. And I don't know that I would do this type of movement for that, but it would be like rotating your shoulder this far back and doing a curl from this position, right? You know,
Okay.
like an extreme stretch position. But an example that I think relates to practical application would be a front foot elevated split squat loaded, but for jiu-jitsu athletes turned into like a deep lunge as well. Well, and it basically is that movement is the kind of a deep lunge. You can even turn it into a step up so that it has like a concentric portion that has application in terms of building strength and muscle, you know, in the target leg. We're not just working on flexibility. There's a couple other things too, I would say. You know, I like to do Zercher squats from a deep position. These kinds of things where we're taking the joint through its full range of motion and we're loading the weak range in a safe, careful way, right? That's kind of a one hack to increasing your flexibility and your strength in a time efficient way.
Okay.
And I think that's real. I think there's some substance to it.
Awesome. And if the research changes, I'm sure you'll change your mind.
I try to.
So if people want to work with you on their strength and conditioning with you, how can they do that remotely? Do you only do that in person? How do you do it?
Absolutely. My service is 100% remote. I work with, again, first responders, jiu-jitsu fighters. We've got a lot of great people on the team. Reach out to me, follow me, Instagram, Facebook. Instagram is fight_fit_training. You can DM me directly, right? And we can go from there.
Good luck with your coaching. Good luck with your competition and training. and keep on trying to represent best practices in both areas of your life.
Yes, sir, Stephan. It's been a pleasure. Really appreciate you having me.